Dallas International Airport was radiant that morning, bathed in golden sunlight slanting through vast glass panels, casting a soft glow across the gleaming stone floors as if the sky itself was rooting for something extraordinary about to unfold. Passengers rolled their suitcases gently, the intercom announcements echoed from the high ceilings, and the rhythm of modern life flowed like a calm, steady current. Amid the crowd, a 16-year-old black boy stepped slowly into a place often considered off-limits to outsiders, the pilot's lounge. On his charcoal gray jacket, a plastic badge was clipped over his left chest. Printed in bold, "Special Guest Aviation Future Initiative." Caleb Johnson, an 11th grader, had just received an opportunity hundreds of other teenagers only dreamed of: a full day of immersion at SkyGlide Airlines. He would get access to training simulators, meet real pilots, and observe the operational rhythm of an entire flight crew. He entered with a shy demeanor, but his eyes sparkled with excitement. Each step matched the pounding of his heart, each breath a silent whisper: "I did it. I'm here." The lounge was as quiet as a floating library. Sleek black leather chairs lined the room. A mock control panel hung on the wall. Large and small aircraft models were displayed inside glass cabinets. Caleb settled into a corner seat, quietly pulling out a weathered notebook, its corners worn from use. He began scribbling notes on everything he observed. Next to him, a headset played a recorded cockpit simulation. A pilot's voice rang out clearly: "Winds to 190 degrees, 11 knots. Preparing for landing." Caleb smiled, his eyes lighting up as if he could see the sky stretching open before him. But he had no idea that just minutes later, that peaceful moment would be shattered by a storm named prejudice. The door to the lounge burst open with such force that the hinge let out a sharp metallic screech. A middle-aged woman, blonde hair neatly curled and pinned behind her head, walked in with deliberate authority. She wore a senior pilot's uniform, the nameplate on her chest reading Captain Linda Graves. Her face was as cold and rigid as steel. Her eyes scanned the room, then locked onto Caleb. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp and openly irritated. Startled, Caleb quickly removed his headset and stood politely. "I'm a special guest with the Aviation Orientation Program. Ms. Carter from HR gave me a badge to come in." He pointed to the badge, holding it out in front of him, but Captain Graves didn't even glance at it. She strode closer, spitting out each word with disdain. "What program? You think this is an amusement park? Give me the badge." Caleb hesitated for a second. Had been told that the badge should stay with him at all times, but the look in Captain Graves' eyes told him that refusing her would only escalate the situation. He handed it over. She yanked it with such force that the lanyard snapped, and the badge hit the floor with a heavy clack. "Fake," she said curtly, as if delivering a verdict. "You're trespassing in a secure area." "I'm calling security." Caleb froze, his chest tightened. "No, it's not fake. Ms. Carter gave it to me this morning. I was selected from over 500 applications." "Enough," Graves snapped, cutting him off. "Anyone could print a badge like this. You really think an airline lets anyone in here just because they're wearing a hoodie?" Her face twisted with suspicion and disdain. The atmosphere thickened like the very oxygen had been sucked out, as if Caleb's presence alone didn't belong among the crisp white shirts and silver epaulettes of the aviation elite. He began to feel the weight of stares, pilots, technicians, flight attendants. Some glanced briefly, then turned away. Others stood motionless, silently observing the unfolding scene. Not one stepped forward. A voice crackled from Graves' radio. "Security unit is en route." Caleb clenched his fists, his heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "I just want to learn. I love airplanes. I've never done anything wrong." Graves turned her back, still holding the badge like a piece of evidence from a crime scene. "We don't need unauthorized individuals like you here. Who knows what you're trying to record something? Steal materials? Sabotage?" Each word stabbed into Caleb's dream like a dagger. The dream he had nurtured since childhood, when his father took him to airport tours, when they built Boeing 747 models together, and when he stayed up nights practicing flight simulations, learning how to land during storms, how to adjust radar, how to manage flaps. Now he was standing in the very place he had always dreamed of, being treated like a criminal. He didn't know what to do. Everything was happening so fast. Graves still held his badge, and footsteps echoed from down the corridor. Security was getting closer. Caleb took a step back, his shoulders touching the cold wall. His eyes scanned the room, silently pleading, but all he got in return was stillness. And then he remembered what his father once told him. One quiet night 2 years ago, if you stay silent when you're treated unfairly, you're siding with them. Truth must be spoken, and it has to come from your own voice. Caleb bowed his head slightly, reached into his pocket, and gripped his phone. He knew, if he didn't speak up today, he might never get another chance. The glass door trembled slightly from a draft in the hallway, but no wind could blow away the suffocating tension that filled the pilot's lounge. Caleb stood still, his back against the cold white wall, his hand tucked inside his jacket pocket as if clutching the only thing that could anchor him. Through the storm of prejudice, he pulled out his phone, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from the chaos pulsing through his veins. He opened the camera, turning it toward himself. In the frame appeared the face of a 16-year-old boy, confused, wounded, yet with a stubborn glint in his eyes that refused to die out, the glint of dignity. "Hello," Caleb began, his voice soft but steady. "My name is Caleb Johnson. I was invited here by the HR department of SkyGlide Airlines. I am not trespassing. I am not impersonating anyone. I am not a criminal." A scoffing laugh sounded behind the camera. Captain Graves had returned, hands on her hips, her face etched with disdain. "Trying to become some kind of social media hero," she sneered. But Caleb kept his eyes on the lens, unfazed by her sarcasm. "I came here because I love airplanes. I've spent hundreds of hours learning how to fly, studying engine types, memorizing takeoff procedures, and today, I'm being treated like an intruder simply because I'm a black teenager." He tapped the livestream button. The loading icon spun a few times before turning red. The stream was live, 8 viewers, then 15, then 32. The scene inside the pilot's lounge appeared, a teenager being accused by a seasoned female pilot. Caleb turned the camera toward Captain Graves, who was still holding the badge, as if it were incriminating evidence. "This is the person accusing me without reason. She didn't check. She didn't contact HR. She just looked at me and decided I didn't belong here." Captain Graves turned away in haste, but Caleb stood taller. He stepped onto a nearby leather chair like a makeshift podium built by injustice itself. "I wrote a 2,000-word essay to be accepted into this program. I told the story of traveling with my father, who's worked in aviation for over 25 years, and about my dream to one day fly a real Boeing aircraft. And yet on my first day here, I'm labeled a saboteur." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few technicians pulled out their phones to Mockbit to check the live stream. A young staffer from the next room hurried in, whispering to someone, "The video's blowing up, almost 1,000 viewers already." Suddenly, the door burst open. Ms. HR stafferston, face flushed with alarm, holding a folder in her hands. "Caleb," she called out, hurrying toward him. "Are you okay? I saw your video. I'm so sorry, should have walked you all the way here." Captain Graves turned sharply. "You know this boy? He had a fake badge." Ms. Carter pulled out a photocopy of the original document. "This badge is real, signed by me. The program was approved directly by the executive board." The room exploded into a deafening silence. Graves froze, her eyes for the first time unsure. I didn't know, and that is the problem," Ms. Carter snapped. "You didn't know, but you still acted. No confirmation, no questions. You just saw the color of his skin and passed judgment." Caleb lowered his phone. The live stream was still running, his face no longer confused, but resolute. Ms. Carter turned to him. "Your father is on his way. He's requested that the scene be preserved. And Caleb, he made it very clear, you did nothing wrong. You don't need to bow your head. Just then, the security team's radio crackled with a deep, commanding voice. FAA personnel are en route. Everyone must remain in place. Livestream, 5,243 viewers. Captain Graves looked lost, adrift in a room that was no longer on her side. The bystanders, who once stood silent, now began whispering. Some stepped back. A young female pilot near the door whispered to a colleague, I've seen things like this before, but this time feels different. Caleb, still standing on the chair, turned back to the camera. I'm not doing this just for myself. I'm doing this for everyone who's ever been asked, what are you doing here? Just because they were different. Today, I won't walk away in silence. He stepped down. His eyes met Captain Graves'. There was no hatred in the manly clarity, an unwavering resolve. You were wrong. And now the world sees it. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, firm, deliberate. The door, not yet fully closed, swung open once more, this time, not by anger, but by justice arriving at last. The door rotated gently, then swung open fully, carrying with it a cold draft from the hallway that swept into the pilot's lounge, heavy with stairs and a silence that cut like ice. The man who stepped inside was the very embodiment of composure, steady, clad in a slate blue uniform of the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, its fabric crisp, its silver insignia gleaming on the left breast like an undeniable symbol of authority and experience. He was Samuel Bryant, Caleb's father. No yelling, no waving of arms. With nothing more than his calm presence, he brought the entire room to a breathless halt. Caleb looked up, his eyes welling with emotion. In that moment, everything he had braced himself against, fear, humiliation, isolation, burst forth in a single stream of tears. Samuel looked at no one else. He walked directly to his son and placed a firm hand on Caleb's shoulder. His eyes filled with both warmth and tightly held fury. Are you all right, Caleb? He asked, his voice low but resonant, like a jet engine passing over the runway in the dead of night. Caleb nodded, trying to hold back his emotion. I'm okay now, I am. At that moment, Captain Graves stepped forward. Her face had turned pale, her gaze no longer sharp, but lost and scrambling. I didn't know he was your son, Mr. Bryant. If I had known. Samuel turned his head, and his expression hardened like cockpit glass pressed tight against high-altitude pressure. And if he weren't my son, would what you did today still be acceptable? The entire room seemed to lurch with the weight of that question. You didn't need to know who his father is. All you needed to know is that he's a human being, a student, officially accepted into an educational program. A child who didn't deserve to have his badge ripped away, to be humiliated, or to have security called on him like a criminal. Graves stood speechless, her lips pressed together, but any excuse she might offer would be meaningless now. Samuel reached into his jacket and produced a second badge, a formal FAA-issued verification of Caleb's participation in the aviation program. He raised it for everyone to see. This is the original, signed by the program director and verified by SkyGlide Airlines. I spent months working with this airline to create opportunities for kids like Caleb. Kids the world too often overlooks, underestimates, or, like this morning, treats as threats. The livestream was still running. Tens of thousands were watching. Comments were flooding in. Unbelievable. Captain Graves must go. Thank you, Mr. Bryant. This needed to be said, a young airline employee whispered. This video's already on the pilot forum. The top execs have probably seen it by now. Samuel took a deep breath, then turned toward the two security guards frozen in the corner. I trust you understand now. Not every command is just, especially when it stems from prejudice. I expect a full incident report detailing how you handled this situation. The guards nodded, cheeks flushed red. One of them muttered quietly, We were sorry, Caleb. We were wrong. Caleb said nothing. He simply gave a slight note, a quiet form of forgiveness that needed no words. Samuel turned to Captain Graves once more. "I'll be submitting a formal request that SkyGlide Airlines place you under suspension, and I will recommend an independent investigation into your prior conduct with students of color." Captain Graves stepped back. Whatever pride she once held was gone. Her shoulders slumped, and her eyes clouded like a cockpit window fogged from within. Livestream, 27,420 viewers. Just then, a female pilot in a dark navy uniform approached. The golden wings pinned to her chest glinted under the overhead lights. Caleb recognized her immediately. It was Captain Dana Lee, one of the few high-ranking black female pilots he had long admired through documentary videos. She walked up and smiled gently at Caleb before turning to Mr. Bryant. "I heard what happened from the staff. I'd like to personally escort Caleb to the cockpit this afternoon. He deserves a real experience, not clouded by misplaced assumptions." Samuel nodded. "Thank you, Captain Lee. I know I can trust you." Captain Lee bowed slightly to Caleb, not out of hierarchy, but out of respect. "Caleb, would you like to see where you truly belong?" A lump rose in Caleb's throat. He looked to his father, then back at Captain Lee. In his eyes, a light that had once been dimmed flared again, stronger now, steadier, and unafraid. "Yes, I'd like that," he answered, his voice soft but certain. And so, he stepped toward the open door. But this time, it wasn't injustice waiting on the other side. It was the sky itself, a place no one could ever again deny him entry, simply because of the color of his skin. The corridor leading to the main aircraft area was lined with polished tiles that reflected the footsteps of three people: Caleb, Captain Dana Lee, and Mr. Samuel Bryant. No words were exchanged along the way, yet the silence no longer carried the weight of suffocation like it had in the pilot's lounge. Now, with each step, Caleb felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders and replaced by something new. A sense of strength, of clarity. Captain Lee opened the door to the aircraft with her personal key card. She turned back to Caleb with a smile, not one of rescue, but of solidarity. It was the smile of someone who had once stood at the very edge where he now stood. The border between a dream and rejection. "You held your ground better than many adults could have," she said gently. "Now let me show you what's waiting on the other side of this door." Caleb nodded. Though he tried to remain calm, his eyes betrayed a quiet thrill. Since childhood, he had studied aircraft parts through models, simulators, and technical manuals, but never once had he set foot inside a real cockpit. Every button, every lever he had imagined was about to become real. The steel door opened with a dignified click. A soft amber light lit the cockpit, as if welcoming a dream that had finally awakened. Before Caleb stood a space brimming with control panels, display screens, buttons, and switches. Everything was neat, orderly, and overwhelming. Captain Lee stepped in first. Taking the left seat, captain's seat, she gestured for Caleb to sit on the right. "This is the first officer's seat. Not a bad place to spend your first afternoon, huh?" she said with a quiet smile. Caleb sat down, his hands trembling slightly as they touched the yoke. These were the same hands that had once shaken from fear and helplessness. Now, they trembled from reverence for touching something sacred. Captain Lee began showing him each component: the altitude controls, the communication systems, the engine start switches, the speed panel. Every detail came with a story about her first takeoff, the moment she was doubted for being a black woman, and how she proved herself not through anger, but through skill. "When I started, someone said to me, a black female pilot, 'You must be dreaming.'" She paused, then added evenly, "Well, I've flown to 42 countries, logged over 10,000 flight hours, and never made a single mistake. Because I didn't fly to prove them wrong, I flew to prove myself right." Caleb looked at her, eyes glistening. "I've never met anyone like you in real life, and from now on, you won't just meet us," she replied, her gaze warm and unwavering. "You'll become one of us." A little later, Captain Lee opened a secondary panel and let Caleb try a simulated operation adjusting wind. direction on the radar display. Even though it was only a simulation, Caleb felt a rush of control more vivid than ever before. Outside, the afternoon sun filtered through the cockpit glass, casting a golden halo at the edge of the horizon. Meanwhile, outside the aircraft, the ripple was spreading. Caleb's live stream video continued circulating across aviation forums. A group of young pilots launched hashtags, Lethimfli and Caleb Deservishki. Ground staff whispered to one another about the presence of Samuel Bryant. In the executive boardroom of SkyGlide Airlines, top leadership was receiving live minute-by-minute updates. Back in the cockpit, Captain Lee reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of fabric used to cover the airline logo on her uniform. She laid it softly on her lap, then turned to Caleb. "There was a time," she said, "when I thought I had to hide parts of myself just to be accepted. But you know what? The opposite is the only way forward. You have to live openly. You have to show up even if rejection awaits." She placed one hand on the throttle, the other gently over Caleb's. "Your dream wasn't taken from you today, it was just beginning." Caleb nodded, his chest full to the brim with emotion. In that moment, he was no longer the boy who had been doubted, no longer the kid who got kicked out of the lounge. He was part of the cockpit, part of the sky, part of the future. As they stepped off the aircraft, the evening sun stretched long shadows across the tarmac, laying out a path that seemed to lead straight to the horizon. Mr. Bryant stood nearby, waiting by the aircraft door. His eyes, no longer filled with fury, now glowed with quiet, unshakable pride. Caleb walked up to him, saying nothing. He simply wrapped his arms around his father, a hug without words because everything had already been said. He had made it through. From a distance, a small group of airport staff began to clap softly. An older passenger waiting at the gate caught Caleb's eye and gave a respectful nod, a silent blessing in return. For the first time that day, Caleb felt light, not because everything was fixed, but because he knew he wasn't alone. And more important, Lias' dream had not been crushed by prejudice. It was alive again, nurtured by courage, and carried forward by those who dared to walk beside the light. Above the skies of Dallas, the afternoon clouds gradually shifted from ivory white to a deep amber layer upon layer of solemn color, washing over a day of upheaval. But inside Caleb, that sky had never looked brighter. Beneath his ash-gray jacket, his heart was beating with a completely new rhythm, light yet racing, whispering one quiet truth: I still have a chance. My dream is still intact. In the car taking father and son away from the airport, Samuel Bryant remained silent for the first stretch of the drive. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew some moments are best honored with silence, especially when they follow deep wounds. Caleb, too, said nothing. He sat next to his father, holding his phone not to rewatch the live stream, but to read the avalanche of comments pouring in like a downpour with no sign of stopping. Proud of you, Caleb. We need more people like him in the cockpit. SkyGlide must be held accountable. This boy brought me to tears. The live stream had surpassed 100,000 views in just 2 hours. Social media platforms were flooded with short clips. Caleb holding up his ID badge, Captain Graves' stunned face, and Samuel Bryant's voice echoing like a wake-up call across an industry too long lulled by privilege. I think the time has come, Samuel finally spoke, his eyes still gazing out the window where the sunset spread like a sea of fire. Caleb tilted his head, unsure. It's time to change the system. Not just punish one person, but address the disease itself. Back at SkyGlide Airlines headquarters, the tremor had begun to spread. An emergency meeting was called at 6:40 p.m., attended by the full executive leadership team. The first to walk in was Company President Miranda Hayes. In her hand was a printed report, red pen markings underlining multiple Linison internal complaint history, involving Captain Linda Graves, detailing 3 incidents in the past 3 years. The common thread: every suspicious individual was a person of color or from a minority group. "This can't be called coincidence," Hayes said coldly. "And today is the final straw." Behind her sat the heads of HR, the VP of Security, and a representative from the National Pilots Federation. The room was colder than the air conditioning, heavier than any jet engine awaiting maintenance. A surveillance video from the pilot's lounge began to play. The room watched silently as Caleb's badge was snatched, as he was interrogated like a criminal. As security was called while he simply sat quietly in the corner. Next came the HR statement. Ms. Carter confirmed she had personally issued Caleb's badge, with signed documentation from the leadership of the Future in Aviation program. Hayes closed the folder and spoke firmly. "Let me be clear. Captain Graves will be suspended indefinitely. Additionally, I propose a full audit of our internal conduct and training protocols. We cannot allow anyone to wear a SkyGlide uniform while carrying prejudice in their heart." Some nodded. Others lowered their heads, perhaps recalling times they had stayed silent when witnessing wrongdoing in the past. That silence, though invisible, had allowed other Graveses to exist like unchecked storms that had never been grounded. At that same hour, in a small cafe near the airport, a group of young pilots huddled around a laptop, watching Caleb's video on repeat. "That kid did what many adults never dared to," one of them said. "He made me think about all the times I watched and said nothing." A curly-haired female pilot nodded slowly. "Maybe this is our chance to start over." They didn't know it yet, but that quiet conversation, along with thousands of others happening at the same time, in airport break rooms, on pilot forums, in crew lounges, would crystallize into a movement, a call to rebuild the aviation industry, this time with equity and inclusion at its core. That evening, in the quiet apartment Caleb shared with his father, Samuel sat at his desk. Before him, a formal document intended for submission to the Federal Aviation Commission. The title, National Aviation Equity Program NAEP, Opening the Skies for All. Caleb walked in, holding a cup of warm milk. "You're still up, Dad?" "I'm writing the introduction," Samuel replied. "Want to hear it?" Caleb nodded. Samuel Bryant began reading slowly. "Clearly, we believe the sky belongs to no one. Every young person who dreams of flying deserves to be nurtured, not questioned. We propose the creation of community-based aviation academies, increased scholarships for minority groups, and mandatory unconscious bias training across all aviation training systems." Caleb stayed quiet for a moment, then smiled softly. "I think you should add one more line." "What line?" Caleb placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "My son is living proof that dreams can still soar if we dare to rise." Samuel smiled, placing his hand over his son's. They didn't need to say anything more, because that night, after all the screens had dimmed and the noise had faded, a quiet revolution had begun in the hearts of a father and son ready to lift an entire sky. 3 days after the incident at Dallas Airport, the story of Caleb Johnson had spread far beyond the boundaries of aviation. It was no longer just a viral video on social media. It had become a wake-up call for an entire nation. Across national television, from morning shows like Good Morning America to weekend specials like 60 Minutes, the name Caleb Johnson appeared everywhere, not as a victim, but as a symbol of courage. The 16-year-old boy who had once been dragged out of the pilot's lounge in humiliation now sat as a guest on major studio sets, beside his father, Samuel Bryant, a veteran leader at the Federal Aviation Administration. The host asked Caleb, "Were you afraid when you decided to go live?" Caleb nodded slowly. "Yes, very afraid. But I was even more afraid of something else, Cecilans. Because if I stayed silent, others like me would keep being treated this way, and no one would know." Applause filled the studio. Not loud, not staged, but quiet, profound applause, as if the country itself were both apologizing and saying thank you. Meanwhile, in classrooms across America, Caleb's story became part of the curriculum. In a high school sociology class in Baltimore, a teacher played the clip of Caleb standing on a chair in the pilot's lounge. holding up his ID badge and declaring, "If you need proof, call HR. But if you need a reason to hate me, maybe it's just my skin that bothers you." The room fell silent. A Latino boy in the back row raised his hand. "Miss, I was once asked to show ID, just to enter the computer lab even though I had my student card." A black girl whispered, "Me too, in the library. But I never dared to say anything." The teacher walked to the board and wrote in large chalk letters, "Justice begins with courage." At that same time, a special press conference was held at SkyGlide Airlines, attended by airline executives, FAR representatives, and civil rights leaders. President Miranda Hayes stepped up to the podium. Standing beside her, Samuel Bryant, and a surprise guest captain, Dana Lee, the pilot who had escorted Caleb to the cockpit on the day of the incident. Hayes' voice was firm, but not cold. "Today, we are not here only to apologize. We are here to make a commitment. Starting next month, SkyGlide will implement mandatory anti-bias training for all flight crews and ground staff. We will establish the Caleb Johnson Scholarship Fund to support aspiring aviation students of color. And finally, we'll ask ourselves a new question: who truly deserves to represent this airline in the skies?" Applause erupted this time from reporters, community leaders, and even SkyGlide employees. A pilot stood up, hand clenched. "We can't undo the past, but we can rebuild from today." Caleb sat in the front row, between his father and Captain Lee. When Hayes mentioned the Caleb Johnson Scholarship Fund, he turned to his father, eyes misty. Mr. Bryant said nothing. He simply placed a hand on his son's shoulder and gave a gentle squeeze. Captain Lee leaned in, whispering, "You see now? You didn't just win justice for yourself, you've cleared a path for so many others." The following day, at a closed-door FAA meeting, Mr. Bryant presented a detailed plan for industry-wide reform, titled "See Me, Seat Me." The program included unconscious bias training for all commercial airline personnel, community aviation academies in low-income areas, where dreams of flight often die early, and annual Wings Open Day, inviting students of all backgrounds to tour airports, sit in cockpits, and meet pilots just as Caleb once met Captain Lee, and most importantly, making Caleb's story a core teaching module in onboarding programs across every major airline. "We don't need to be perfect," Bryant concluded, "but we have an obligation to be fair." The entire hall rose in a standing ovation. That evening, Caleb sat alone by his bedroom window, gazing at the night sky. On the table beside him, a handwritten letter, its cursive neat and heartfelt. "Dear Caleb, I'm Brandon, 12, from Kentucky. I saw your video and I cried. I love airplanes too, but thought I'd never be a pilot because I don't look like the people up there. But you made me believe I could. Thank you for not staying silent." Caleb held the letter tightly, as if letting go might cause everything to vanish like smoke. But it wouldn't, because this story was no longer smoke. It was a milestone, the beginning of a new journey, not just for Caleb, but for everyone who had never truly been seen. He thought to himself, "If anyone ever doubted I belonged in the cockpit, then I'll become the reason. They never dare think that way again." 6 days after the incident at Dallas Airport, Caleb Johnson's name wasn't just on the news anymore. It had become the center of national discourse. And as with every major wave of change, behind the voices of support and solidarity came a flood of backlash, criticism, distortion, and attack from those threatened by the loss of their long-held privilege. That Monday morning, on a nationally televised political commentary show, a conservative host loudly challenged the narrative. Is this really about racism, or just a defiant teen hungry for attention? Are we now turning every disciplinary action into a social tragedy and rewarding those who stir up conflict? The clip spread like wildfire. Soon, beneath videos of Caleb, the comment sections began filling with sarcasm, doubt, and even threats. "He's just a troublemaker turned into a hero by the media. Son of the FAA crying for justice. What a hypocrite. This kid's an embarrassment to the aviation industry." Caleb read those words past midnight, The glow of the screen lit his face, drained and cold. In that moment, he felt like he was falling from thousands of feet without a parachute. Everything he had done, all he believed was right, now twisted into some manipulative theater. He closed the phone, gripping it tightly. His hands trembled not out of fear, but frustration. His father, Samuel Bryant, stepped out of his study. He saw his son sitting quietly on the sofa, shoulders slightly slumped. No questions were needed. He knew. Samuel sat beside him, no hollow comfort. Just a simple gesture. He handed Caleb an old wooden box. "I've kept this since my first day at the FAA. Open it." Caleb lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of small, yellowing slips of paper, neatly folded. Each one bore a handwritten line. "You should go back to where you belong. You're not good enough for this industry. Don't bother trying. Sky isn't made for people like you." Caleb looked up, stunned. "These," Samuel said slowly, "are what I received in 1998 when I became the first black man appointed to manage air traffic control in Denver. I didn't keep them out of hate. I kept them as reminders that every step forward brings pushback, and if you stop, they win." Caleb looked deep into his father's eyes, and in that gaze, he saw himself not just the boy trembling in the pilot's lounge, but the one now learning to face storms as a guide. The next morning, Caleb reappeared not on national TV, but at a public high school in South Chicago. Over 80% of the students there were people of color. Nearly half came from low-income families. The stage was a small multi-purpose room, plastic chairs in rows. A flickering projector cast a dim light on a cracked wall. But when Caleb entered, the room brightened not with light, but with quiet strength. He wore no suit, no tie, just a 16-year-old in a hoodie, and John standing among those who looked like him. He told his story, not dramatized, not embellished. He spoke of the cockpit, of Captain Lee, of the fear of being cast out, and the sting of those midnight comments. "You know," Caleb said, looking directly into their eyes, "standing up doesn't always mean you'll be celebrated. Sometimes it means you'll be attacked even more. But if we don't do it, who will?" A boy in the front row, his name was Malik, raised his hand, voice trembling. "Do you think I could be a pilot? Even though I've never been on a plane before." Caleb smiled gently. "You have eyes that look straight ahead, a voice that's never been silenced. You have the right to fly just like anyone else." Applause echoed. But this time, it wasn't for Caleb. It was for themselves, for dreams once buried now rising again. That evening, Caleb received an unexpected message from Captain Dana Lee. "A few colleagues and I are launching a non-profit flight for all. We want you to be our first public face, not just to inspire, but to redefine who belongs in the cockpit. Are you ready, Captain Caleb?" Caleb read the message over and over. For the first time, the word captain didn't feel distant. It didn't make him feel small. It made him understand. True responsibility doesn't come after success, it comes the moment you choose to stand for what's right. He typed his reply, just one line: "Ready, Captain Lee. I'm ready to fly and bring others with me." On an early autumn morning, the sky over Atlanta stretched high and crystal clear. Golden sunlight, soft as honey, spilled over Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, which was preparing for a historic event in American aviation, the official launch of the non-profit organization Flight for All, a movement inspired by the story of Caleb Johnson, teenager once removed from a pilot's lounge because of his skin color, now returning to open the gates for thousands of others to follow. The large domestic terminal hall had been transformed into the event space. No flashy banners, no blinding stage lights, just a modest wooden podium, rows of simple white chairs, and a single large emblem on the backdrop, a pair of open wings, with the bold words above, "Flight for All, a sky without barriers." In the front row, Caleb sat beside Captain Dana Lee and his father, Samuel Bryant. Next to them were FAA representatives, aviation executives, and most notably young faces, high school students from underserved neighborhoods. many seeing a real aircraft up close for the first time. When the microphone crackled to life, the room fell into silence, and then a warm, steady voice spoke. It was Captain Lee. "Today is not about honoring a single individual," she began. "Today is about honoring collective courage sparked by one 16-year-old who stood tall. When an entire room turned its back on him, applause began soft at first, then it grew, until it roared like the engines of a Boeing ready for takeoff. Caleb stepped up to the podium. He held no script, no teleprompter. Everything he was about to say had been written in his heart, a heart that once trembled, once broke, and now carried a mission reborn. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caleb began. His voice did not shake, but it brimmed with sincerity. "I used to think that all it took to sit in the cockpit was hard work and knowledge. But then I realized sometimes talent alone isn't enough. Sometimes doors stay closed just because the person knocking doesn't have the right skin color. And that is wrong." The room fell utterly still. No one dared to move. That day, when I was pulled out of the lounge, I didn't just lose a personal dream. I saw hundreds, thousands of other dreams being stopped by the same wall, prejudice. And I knew if I didn't act, who would? He paused. "Flight for All isn't about honoring me. It's about making sure no one ever has to apologize for dreaming. That no one has to prove they belong just because they don't look like those who have always held the yoke." The hall erupted. Some stood, tears shimmering in their eyes. Caleb remained upright, his gaze focused on the students seated below the stage. He smiled gently. After the ceremony, hands-on cockpit stations were set up around the terminal cockpit simulators, guided by volunteer pilots of all races, ages, and genders. Tiny hands reached out to grasp the control yokes, flip switches, and adjust altitude knobs with eyes wide in awe, some even glassy with emotion. A 13-year-old girl of Asian descent named Lynn, after gripping the mock yoke, turned to her mother and whispered, "Mom, I think I could fly." Her mother held her hand tightly. Her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. And now, I believe it too." At the same time, social media exploded with hashtags like Flight for All and Caleb Changedthiki. Photos of Caleb standing with children, posing with pilots of color, and quotes from Captain Lee were shared millions of times. One post stood out. "You don't often see a 16-year-old shift an entire industry toward justice. But today you did." That evening, on the CBS Nightly News, footage of the ceremony appeared as a beacon among reports of war, violence, and division. The anchor closed the segment with these words, "Perhaps we cannot soar if we carry the heavy weight of prejudice. But today, Caleb Johnson, prove if you're brave enough to fly. The world will have no choice but to look up." That night, in his small bedroom, Caleb sat writing in his journal. He wrote slowly, as if each word unlocked a door once closed. Day 172 since the airport incident. Today, the path ahead is clearer than ever. Not because I've entered the cockpit, but because I've helped others open the doors to their own. At the final line, he paused, then looked out the window. The moon hung high, the sky still vast, and somewhere in the night, the low hum of a distant aircraft reminded him dreams have no color, and justice knows no limits. Less than 2 weeks after the launch of Flight for All, a 2-0-word article appeared on the front page of the conservative newspaper The American Liberty. The headline, printed in bold red letters, read, "The overhyped boy behind the Caleb Johnson spectacle." The article scrutinized Caleb's father, Samuel Bryant, alleging that Caleb's admission into the aviation program was a political favor, a form of performative anti-discrimination designed for media attention. The author questioned whether Flight for All genuinely served its purpose, or was merely a facade for minorities seeking undue privileges in an industry already deemed safe and competitive. Beneath the article, hundreds of comments poured in. Many condemned the piece, but numerous others echoed its sentiments, unleashing harsh criticisms. "This kid is just exploiting his skin color for attention. Just learn to fly. Leave politics out of it. Aviation isn't a stage for victimhood performances. Caleb read each line, each word in a room that once felt peaceful, now transformed into a battleground of information warfare. He didn't cry, but he felt as though his dream was being stripped away once more not by an individual, but by an entire system ready to devour any glimmer of hope daring to break through. His father, Samuel, was no stranger to such attacks, but this time, he didn't shield his son. He sat down, placed his phone on the table, and spoke candidly. Caleb, this is no longer just your story. This is a test for an entire generation, and you've become its symbol whether you're ready or not. Caleb looked up. His eyes no longer reflected just the pain of a boy once humiliated, but the resolve of someone who had weathered storms, now gazing into the gray sky, seeking a path to ascend. The following day, Caleb attended an impromptu press conference at the main office of Flight for All. Key members were present: Captain Dana Lee, FAA representatives, sponsors, and both domestic and international media. There were no flashy lights, no slogans, just Caleb standing at the podium, wearing a simple white shirt, with the black-winged logo on a white background behind him. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice calm yet clear. I'm not here today to defend myself. I'm here to reiterate why I stand here. He scanned the room, meeting the lenses of cameras and the curious eyes of onlookers. Taking a deep breath, he continued, those who claim I was favored into the cockpit likely don't know that. I had to write 3 essays, undergo interviews, and complete hundreds of hours in simulators just to pass the selection process. Those who say I'm merely playing politics probably have never had to bow their heads after being pulled from their seat solely because of their skin color. Those who believe Flight for All is just a performance say invite them to visit one of the 12 centers under construction, where children from impoverished neighborhoods are learning to operate simulators, writing their dreams on whiteboards, daring to believe that the sky can be theirs too. The room erupted in applause, but Caleb gently raised his hand to quiet them. I don't seek applause for being a victim. I simply want to be treated as a young person with the right to dream, to err, to grow, and to rise just like anyone else. Captain Lee stepped forward, placing a hand on Caleb's shoulder. She addressed the press. Flight for All wasn't created for media attention. It was born to dismantle the mental barriers where safety is sometimes reserved for the few. Simultaneously, in an East Coast television studio, veteran journalist Laura Bentanwo had first interviewed Caleb. Decided to break from the production script. During the evening news, she aired a new interview clip. In it, Caleb was asked, if someone told you, you don't belong here, what would you do? He looked directly into the camera, his voice steady yet sharp. I'd look them in the eye and say, good. Because I didn't come here to fit any, came to transform this place into one where everyone belongs. The 20-second clip garnered over 8 million views within 4 hours, accompanied by the hashtag #We'llBelong. That weekend, a quiet yet profound event took place at the FAA headquarters. The official passage of the Equal Conduct in Aviation Act, mandating all commercial airlines with over 50 aircraft to implement bias training programs and establish independent complaint systems for passengers and staff. In the meeting minutes, a small note read, this law was inspired by the Caleb Johnson incident, a reminder that dreams should not be confined by prejudice. That evening, Caleb spoke little. He returned to his room, opened an old model airplane, disassembled each part, and reassembled it. Not because it was broken, but because he needed to touch something precise, logical, and impartial. Upon completion, he affixed a small note to the fuselage. Not everyone is born to fly, but everyone has the right to learn how. And Caleb knew his journey was far from over. He was still mid-flight, and headwinds now were merely opportunities to soar higher. 3 months after the nationwide surge of the We'll Belong campaign, the federal government convened a historic National Aviation Forum in Washington, D.C. Titled Flight Forward, Skies Without Barriers, The event brought together lawmakers, aviation industry leaders, educational experts, and notably, young individuals from across the United States, those who have long dreamed of flying, but never believed it was within their reach. Among the keynote speakers, Caleb Johnson's name stood prominently, not due to any official title, but because his voice resonated most profoundly. Held in the Grand Hall of the National Convention Center, the stage backdrop featured a massive LED screen displaying the words, "Every dream deserves altitude." Dressed in the uniform of an aviation cadet from the FAA-sponsored academy he now attends, Caleb stepped onto the stage without fanfare. He stood as a living testament to resilience and began his address. 3 months ago, I was pulled from a seat because someone believed I didn't belong there. Today, I stand here not because I've won, but because we're beginning to redefine what it means to belong. The audience fell silent, absorbing his words. I'm not here to recount a sorrowful tale. I'm here to tell young people, if anyone has ever made you doubt your worth, remember, no one has the right to determine how far you can fly except you. The applause that followed was steady and heartfelt, echoing the awakened aspiration of a generation. Following his speech, a short film chronicled Caleb's journey, from the moment he was removed from the pilot lounge, through the inauguration of Flight for All, his engagements at schools, and the simulator sessions where underprivileged children first touched flight controls. The film concluded with Caleb's voice, "No one is born with wings, but everyone deserves the chance to learn how to fly." As the screen dimmed, a new symbol emerged, the Johnson X-1 cockpit simulator, training model developed by the FAA, and a team of young engineers inspired by Caleb. His name was etched on its side, accompanied by the inscription, "In memory of the moment a dream was denied," paving a new path for thousands. The teenager, once trembling under scrutinizing gazes, had now become the namesake of a simulator, set to be installed in over 150 schools nationwide. Backstage, Caleb reunited with a familiar face, Captain Dana Lee. For the first time in months, she wasn't in her pilot uniform, but donned a sleek gray suit, now serving as a policy advisor for the FAA's crew training reforms. "You've exceeded every expectation," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But what makes me proudest isn't that you've changed aviation. It's that you've retained your compassion." Caleb smiled. "I can't afford to stay angry. If I did, there'd be no room to hear the voices of the kids coming after me." She nodded, eyes warm. "That's when you're no longer just a survivor. You're a guide." That night, Caleb and his father returned to Atlanta on a routine domestic flight, but as they boarded, something extraordinary happened. The entire flight crew lined the aisle, bowing their heads in respect as he passed. A young flight attendant handed him a small commemorative card. "Honorary passenger flight for all the first to broaden the skies." Caleb turned to his father, eyes glistening. "Mr. Samuel smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "You've made people look up not just at planes, but with renewed hope." Throughout the flight, Caleb remained awake, gazing out at the night sky, watching clouds drift beneath the wings. In his mind, one truth crystallized: justice isn't found in belated apologies. It's in forging paths for those too weary to knock on closed doors. A week later, at the graduation ceremony of the Wings Horizon Academy first pilot training school, established by Flight for All, Caleb returned as an honorary instructor. As he stepped onto the stage to speak, hundreds of cadets in blue uniforms rose in unison, declaring, "We are the generation that won't bow to prejudice." Caleb said nothing. He simply placed his hand over his heart, a heart that once beat solely for his own dream, now pulsing for thousands more. The story concluded not with thunderous applause, but with a poignant image: Caleb standing on the tarmac, the Flight for All emblem emblazoned on the fuselage of a Boeing 787 behind him. The camera slowly zoomed in on his face, not the face of a wounded teenager, but that of a future ready to soar.